Hello and welcome to the ZGuy programming channel, Python edition. Today's topic, variables. Before we get into that, before we get into this topic today, I would like to make a correction to a statement I made in my first video. I mentioned that when you name a Python program, you must add the .py extension to the file name or it won't work properly. That's not a true statement. It will work, however, it is considered a best practice to include the .py extension so that it is clear what type of file you have. Just as Word documents end in .doc or .docx, you should also use the py extension when writing Python programs. Okay, now this tutorial is going to talk about variables. We've used them already, but we haven't really discussed them in detail, and today we're going to do that. Variables are locations in memory that are used to store information. When you write a program, you're going to have lots of possible calculations. You're going to have strings of information that you're going to have to store and manipulate, and you're going to accept data from the users that could be of varying types, and you have to have a place to put it in order to work on it later. You may accept a person's name and address at the beginning of your program, but it may not get used till much later in your program, so you have to have that storage place, and that's what variables are used for. Python has 5 standard data types. I have them listed down here below: number, string, list, tuple, and dictionary. Here's an example of number variables. Miles is the variable and it's storing an integer. Balance is the variable and it's storing a floating point number. Name is the variable. Bill is the string that's stored in that variable. You have to remember, when using a variable in a calculation, it's the contents of the variable, the value assigned to the variable, that will be used wherever you place that variable in your program. Here's an example of a list. Now, a list is used to store items separated by commas, and they can be of varying data types. So you'll see a string, house, an integer, 45, another string, car, a floating point number, and another integer. You can have multiple data types in any order that you want in a list. You can modify the contents of a list. The 4th data type is a tuple. Very similar to the list, except it cannot be modified. And you'll notice that a tuple is defined by the parentheses around your item list, and a list is defined by the square brackets around your list of items. And finally, we have a dictionary. It's a more complex storage type, but basically it can be used to store key/value pairs. So for instance, your key is name and the value is Jeff. Your key is age and its value is 3, and the key is sex and the value is M. So that's an explanation of the 5 standard data types. Now we're going to talk a little bit about variable initialization. You've seen the basic assignment statements here in our program as we discuss the 5 data types. Now we're going to look at a couple of unique assignment statements. The first is one that allows us to initialize multiple variables to the same value. So you have A equals B equals C equals 15. And in a minute we'll run this program and you'll see when we print A, B, and C that they all show the value 15. Now just a reminder, when you print these variables this way, You cannot just say print ABC. They must be separated by commas or you will get an error. The next type of initialization that you can do is to initialize multiple variables with different values. So here we have A, comma, B, comma, C equals string 545.34. All right, so let's save this program as variables.py, and then we'll run that. And as you'll see, initialize multiple variables to the same value. Here's your A, B, and C, all 15. Initialize multiple variables with different values, and you'll see that our first variable was the value string, the second variable B was 500, and the third variable C was 45.34. What you also noticed here is that we reused the same variables later in the program and gave them new variables, new values. And that's perfectly legitimate. You can do that. It can cause problems in your program maybe if you assign A an integer one time and then A is a string another time. That's probably not a best practice, but certainly changing the value of the variable throughout the program is a legitimate thing to do. So that's just a little bit of information about variable initialization. Now the next thing I want to go over is type conversion. And we did see a little bit of this in the intro video where we had to convert an integer to a string so that we could display it in the print statement, and we had to convert a string to an integer, so we had to do a calculation on it. Sometimes it's desirable to use a variable in a manner that doesn't work with its defined type. For instance, you may have a string A that we set to 20, and you want to do a calculation on it. So we take B and assign it A plus 14. Well, A is a string, so we use that internal function called int, which converts the string to an integer. Allows you to do your math. Now, it doesn't permanently change A to an integer type variable. It's a temporary conversion for the purposes of that line of code. And we'll run that. Let's remove all this so we don't see that. We'll save it. And there you go. 34 is the result of 20 plus 14. Now there are many different types of conversions available. You can say int x, just like we did, converts x to an integer. There's long, converts x to a long integer. There's float, which converts x to a floating point number. There's string, which converts x to a string. Hex will take a decimal number, okay, a base 10 decimal number, like we normally count with, and convert that to a hexadecimal number. And OCT will take a decimal number, base 10, and convert that to an octal number. So this concludes our explanation of variables and type conversions and variable initializations. Again, I hope this has been very helpful to you and that you find great enjoyment as you proceed to learn more about the Python programming language.